So I would like to use this opportunity to welcome you all to the 2021 Nabeel Hamdi lecture here at the 19th Oxford Human Rights Festival. I'm Cathrine Brun. I'm the director of CENDEP, the Center for Development and Emergency Practice. The festival's aim is to raise awareness of human rights issues through the arts, which include film, performance, talks, workshops, and exhibitions. The festival was founded in 2003, and it was initiated by postgraduates and staff at CENDEP here at the School of Architecture at Oxford Brookes University. We also collaborate and welcome the City of Oxford and its communities to work alongside with us. So before I welcome our guest for tonight, I need to give a few bits of housekeeping. All participants have been muted, and our community space will be the chat box, where you're all welcome to share your reflections and questions to our speakers. We ask you to be respectful in interactions in the chat box. We are recording this event, so those that are not able to make it today are able to watch it across our social media site later. So please turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. We will only be publishing speaker view. The theme of this year's festival is disruption. We have all experienced it this year, the disruption because of the pandemic. For the festival, it started exactly a year ago when a number of planned events were cancelled as we went into lockdown at the beginning of the 18th festival. This year's festival is special then, as it's fully online for the first time in its 19 years. Disruption has been experienced by all of us, but still the disruptions have exposed the injustices and inequalities in our societies. The festival is a space for discussion, new ideas, sharing of experiences, a space for coming together to place on the agenda some of these injustices and to inspire each other to act. Today's event will contribute to this discussion. And it's a big day for us. We are welcoming you to the Nabeel Hamdi lecture. And today we will learn more about the protagonist himself. Emeritus Professor Nabeel Hamdi, the founder of CENDEP's master's degree in development and emergency practice and the long-term director of the center. He's one of the most distinguished academics in our field. And Nabeel has had a long career of inspiring people to bring out their potential in making change. He himself said once that he wanted to inspire people to disturb the existing order of things and with vision and common sense induce lasting and positive change. This is such a great motto for us and for the festival. So to lead us through today's conversation is Professor Emeritus Hans Skotte from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Hans is an architect specializing in post-war and post-disaster recovery studies. One of his major contributions to the field was his work Tents in Concrete on the internationally funded housing reconstruction in Bosnia. Hans is deeply involved in issues of power of housing. And I love this phrase that I've learned from Hans what housing can do to enhance societal and material recovery. And I've learned so much from both of these two giants in the field. So for me, it's also part of my history coming together from NTNU and Brookes. Today, we are expecting a truly inspiring conversation about Nabeel's practice, his academic life, and his broader life experience. And we will also hear from some other colleagues and friends of Nabeel. So with that, over to you, Hans and Nabeel.
Thank you, people. Thank you, Cathrine. It's an odd, weird, strange situation to be in, being in a festival in my own dining room, with candles and lights and stuff. It's totally surreal. And yet we were able to establish this link with people we know, people we like to be with, even through this crazy screen. So tonight, I will try to run a conversation with Nabeel. I hope he will do most of this talking. On how his life has been affecting his thinking and his practice. We all know his books, or most of us know his books, but we don't know so much about the man behind the books and the thinking that's embedded in them. I've known Nabeel for 20 odd years. meeting him the first time at York University. And what I remember was that his lectures were a lot of fun, which was not, or is not, normally the case with lectures. But Nabeel was different in many ways, actually. And subsequent to that, he became member of the board to the program that we run at the university in Trondheim, the Urban Ecological Planning program. And we traveled to Sri Lanka a couple of times together. And it is scary and it is honorable to be asked to have a conversation with Nabeel. With us, we will have 4 associates, as it were, people that actually have practiced the stuff that Nabeel is writing about and advising us to do. It's Supichai Toivich, we call her Nong, from Bangkok. Is Anshu Sharma, the founder of Seeds in India. Is Jayaratne Kanake from Sri Lanka, and it's David Sanderson, who is currently, well, he used to be the director of CENDEP. He is now at the University of New South Wales in Australia. They will come on later after Nabeel and I have been speaking for a small half hour. And to the viewers, repeating what Cathrine said, please jot down your questions during the event rather than wait until the Q&A part will take place at the end of it. Because it's when issues come up that actually trigger you that you should write down your questions. So don't wait until the end of it. And again, a challenge to most of us perhaps, but we have been advised to keep our tongue, behave, no bad language. And that is actually as much an appeal to me as it is to you. So now, if Nabeel could come on the screen, and we could sort of talk a little. Hello, Nabeel.
Hello. Nice to see you.
That's crazy. This is weird beyond anything.
Weird.
Now, so I have, we've spoken about this a couple of times before, that I've always said to my students that when you take a picture or you look at something, it is almost as if it's a hypothesis. You have to have it confirmed or falsified by speaking to people who are of that area or of that situation. And that brings me to the title that you suggested for this event. To see is to listen. Bring that out. What did you put into that?
Well, it kind of captions both my past in terms of where I was brought up and all the rest of it, and of course my work, generally speaking. I can't remember very many books at all at home where I used to live with my family. Mostly it was stories about anything and everything. But equally, it was interesting because when I was in Cairo, we lived in Cairo for 3-4 years, I think. Fairly regularly, I used to go to stand on the back of my older brother's tricycle, and he'd pedal his way to the playground. And on the way, we would stop at this shoemaking shop, this shoe repair shop. I don't know why or how it happened, but we did. And they would give us a few bits and things to eat and so on. And then I'd see these weird shoes all over the place. And I'd say, what's that? This sort of shoe with a curled front and leather flowers stuck all over it and that sort of stuff. And the guy would start telling me stories about where they came from and why the shoe is that way and why it was broken and who wore it and where they live and how they earn. Incredible sort of insight into family life. True or not, it didn't matter to me at that time, of course. But it was the beginnings of really trying to understand the fact that, I see what I see very clearly. But what am I looking at? I'm seeing the shoe, but what's going on here? Why is it so weird? And that, of course, brings us right up to the current day, which is where we know that cities or the places that we live in, work in, and so on, have both the visible structure, we call it the visible structure of place, stuff that we can photograph, look at, measure, houses, playgrounds, schools, and that sort of stuff. But equally, and if not more importantly, the invisible structure of place. And that can only be told through narrative. That narrative, of course, can be captioned in stories, or it can be captioned in music or in artwork. Doesn't matter how it's captured, but that's the revealing side of it, as it were. So that's where really that title comes from. It's both the past and the present in terms of my own kind of background.
Great. This emphasis of narrative, we don't have, that is not really that is not how we teach. I'm doing a writing course next week on that particular, the quality of this. I mean, the reflections that come out of these narratives and the insights that actually are contained in these narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think they are. And, you know, people often ask me when we're doing our sort of transit walks in cities or wherever, how do you get into these conversations so that you can actually get this narrative? My problem is not getting into them, it's getting out of them. People think, you know, there's just wonderful insights into this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it. That invisible structure of how people relate, the sense of well-being, the sense of belonging, the places that make you happy, the places that make you sad, all those kinds of things emerge in the narrative. And if one can listen enough to that and not just be waiting to talk, as most of us do when we're trying to listen, the insights are unbelievable about the hidden structure of place.
But also time comes into it, history comes into it, their story, their life story, which tells so much about the place.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And it's easy to sort of say, well, look, I'm not interested in that. Can you get on with it? Because I've got a meeting coming up. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you have to actually give it lots of time. And that's partly the problem with listening. It takes time. And, you know, arguably we, you know, constantly are busy and not having time because we've got to get on. We've got a meeting. We've got this, we've got that to produce and so on. But actually it requires time. So, you know, active listening is central to our business, and it was very much central to my background, hence the title.
Could I have the first slide that I have? Angus, could you put on the slide with Nabeel? Because the picture to the right is when we were in Kampala, and that man was at the end of the line all the time. It was impossible to drag him around the place because he kept ending up speaking to people or talking to people all the time. And as you can see, that sort of interest in other people has been with him, irrespective of the length of his hair. It's been, but it's true. I've actually found that you have to speak to people for an hour and a half. This is how I quantify it. You have to speak to people an hour and a half before they actually open up fully. So it certainly takes time.
It does indeed. And that's why it also makes a difference as to where you speak to them. You know, traditionally, you'll invite groups or communities to the city hall or town hall or whatever. And of course, being an unfamiliar environment, they're already slightly closed in terms of what they're going to reveal. So it's much better for them to be in control of their own place, which is either in the street, in the cafe, in their own halls, in their houses, and so on.
But that, Nabeel, actually brings on a much deeper issue, because it reveals, or it actually confirms the relationship we have to our environment. It is part of us in a way.
Absolutely.
So you cannot be full as a human being if you sort of play out in a totally alien environment. It's not you if you are in an environment that you don't know or are unfamiliar with. So it's part of it. It's a much wider issue, which is
indeed, absolutely.
I really appreciate that. Nabeel, we also have limited time. We could talk about this for the rest of the day, but we will now proceed as agreed, because I would like to ask you about your becoming an architect in the first place. How was that? How Why did you become an architect?
I have absolutely no idea at all. To that question, I haven't the foggiest idea. No, I don't know. I wanted to be an architect very early on, and it actually started when I was very, very young. And I remember events that I can remember, sitting in my playroom at home here in London when we came, and playing with my train set, and I was making these houses and so on out of shapes and this, that, and the other. And these two very tall men walked in. They're both architects that my father, I think, had commissioned to design the Royal Palace in Baghdad, oddly enough. And they started talking about all these various things and so on. And I was fascinated. Put that window over there, that the roof needs to be slightly steeper because it'll let the rain and the snow run off more easily. That door's far too difficult to get into. That car is actually trying to get into all sorts of stuff like that. So I was fascinated by that. So that was the first sort of crit that I had. But then also I went in when I was finishing my O-levels and at secondary school. I went in to see my career advisor, and he was sort of looking at me, and he was saying, knowing my background from Iraq and so on, looking at me and saying, and what my grades were terrible, by the way, at school. And he said, well, what is it that you want to do when you leave here? And I said, I want to be an architect. And he looked at me curiously and he said, have you thought of oil? What the heck of oil? At which point I left and did my A-levels in London at a crammer. I actually got into, did an interview at the Architectural Association at the AA, which was indeed a connection back to oil, because the fees were funded by the Ministry of Oil, Iraqi Ministry of Oil. I think it might have helped that my uncle was Minister of Oil. I don't know. Could have done.
Oh.
Well, who knows? And that, of course, led me to the AA. And at the AA, great time. I had fantastic education, winding up really with a dissertation or final project based on the work of John Harbroken, a Dutch architect, who was looking at that time about building housing in a way that involves people to design their own homes. And that got me very engaged in my last 2 years at the AA. Lucky enough at that time to have them presented as part of my final presentation to the then Minister of Housing, Anthony Greenwood, and the GLC. And they thought, well, let's try it out. Let's try this out. And so I was very lucky to actually end up with my final project at the AA, something that I could actually take into the Greater London Council, and it was tried and built. I think it was Frank Lloyd Wright who once said, make sure that the first project you design and build, is as far away from home as possible. I got as far as East London, I think, with that in Stamford Hill.
But Nabeel, since you mentioned briefly that your uncle was a Minister of Oil in Iraq, you are actually from Iraq initially. You're born in Iraq, or?
No. I was born in Afghanistan, in Kabul. I think at the British Embassy, because that was the only clinic that was trustworthy about that. No birth certificate, but there was a letter from the ambassador, my father, congratulating him on the birth of his second child. I still have that letter. It's about the only proof I have of all of that. Yeah, so then 2 years in Afghanistan, 4 years in Cairo, and then in London from 1951. My father again started the Iraqi embassy in London.
And then you ended up at the Greater London Council.
Yeah.
Where you, in a way, are now as well, in the Grenfell.
No, I have nothing to do with that inquiry at the moment.
You haven't?
Kind of opted
but I saw you were appointed.
Yes, indeed. But I opted out of that because largely because of logistics, requiring me to be 3 or 4 days in London every week, all that sort of stuff. So that I kind of stepped out of. But no, the Great London Council was a fantastic experience. It really was. The experimentation was wonderful. It was my first real opportunity, in a sense, to be working in a practical way with the tenants, low-income housing tenants on the housing waiting list, and not realizing that as I was working with them, something else was going on in parallel. there was a sense of community developing. Families would share ideas about how they were going to arrange their own flats and houses and so on. They would come together and do stuff together. And there was a real sense of togetherness occurring there. And I suddenly realized that actually, going back to John Turner's wonderful comment that has inspired me for ages, what a house does is equally, if not more important than what it is. What it does in building community, giving you a sense of security, teaching skills, building a sense of belonging, all of that stuff is absolutely vital. And that, to me, is the development agenda. What a house is the architectural agenda. What it does is the development agenda. And that's something you can either take on board or otherwise, and we can talk about that in a minute.
But that was applied in your work in London also. I mean, that sort of approach to your work.
Very much so. 2 projects, one in Stamford Hill, as I say, and one in Adelaide Road, which is near Chalk Farm in London, and still in great shape. No, that's my first really encounter with looking at ways and means by which we engage with individual families and community groups in deciding the designs of their own house, which was very weird at that time, still is to some extent, particularly for low-income families.
No, but I mentioned this because you don't have to go to the so-called developing world to deal with these issues. They are all the way around us. The way we approach our task as architects. So we apply the same principles here, which you already have sort of confirmed or proven by your work.
Absolutely.
And from that, you went on to even to the United States.
Yep. Well, it was after 1978. It was time to do something different. Politics in this country was changing. Margaret Thatcher was coming in. Things were happening in terms of the public sector. It seemed to be timely to move on. And the idea was to be a year in the States teaching, doing something completely different, and then coming back. But 1 year led to 2 years because we had a wonderful project in Tennessee Town, which was the capital of Kansas, working with the community there on upgrading, which is a project in its own right, which was great. So they said, stay on for another year. And I did. And then I just had a chance to kind of go around and lecture here and there in the United States. Went up to Canada for a year, in fact, to Ottawa, and then nearly 10 years at MIT, which was wonderful. And that's really when I got involved in international development.
Yeah. You ended up or not ended up in, but a lot of your work was done in Sri Lanka. That's where you met Jaya, which we will meet later. Today.
Indeed, really privileged to be part of that Million Houses program. It was fantastic. In fact, that was the context in which most of the tools and community action planning stuff that we still use was developed. I'm really grateful to that lot.
We were to the audience. Nabeel and I was in Sri Lanka together with Cathrine also, actually.
Yeah.
When was that? That was in the about 15 years ago, something like that. No, 10 years ago. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, what stays in my mind still is the experience we had. Can I have the second picture, please? We visited, this is post tsunami. Tsunami was in 2004, 2004-05. And we visited, we had a workshop where that actually was run by Nabeel. And we visited this housing scheme, and it was 101 houses built by a Norwegian NGO. And people started to do, they opened shops in their houses. And we had this workshop in which one of the local planners came on and complained bitterly about the fact that people started to use their homes as shops. They should be zoned. The shops should be placed somewhere else, where they were zoned as I don't know what color you use in the UK. And the way, and most of us, at least I was getting angry because of this intrusion almost. But Nabeel, he took him in. I even have a picture of him, but I won't show him because it's not about him, about the planner. It's about the way Nabeel approached the man and the problem that he brought on. So this brings us to capacity, or your understanding of dealing with the contradictions, almost doing this negotiation approach that you have.
Well, it was interesting. That's an interesting side of it. It certainly has been central to all my work, and it's central to all participatory work, the ability to negotiate. And there are some principles there that I learned at a very early stage. And I'll come back to your example in a minute. But the first time that I really sort of engaged with that negotiation skills was these two people that were talking to each other. One was a housing official. The other was a guy who owned a lot of land that the housing official wanted for a housing development. You know, they were chatting away and having a great time together and so on. And then the guy that I actually knew at the end of the talk said, the guy's lying through his teeth. In fact, I was lying to him as well. He was lying to me. And I said, I don't understand, but you're getting on so well together. He said, yes, our good relationship is based on mutual mistrust. So, you know, so we know we're both crooks, as it were. Now we can get on well together. But coming back to your example, so that was the first time I thought to myself, well, you know, it's a cultural, very different things, because I would say our relationship has to be built on mutual trust. But then we had lots of, when I was at MIT, we had quite a few programs from the Harvard Business School on negotiation skills and that sort of stuff. And one of the key principles that I learned about was that you never say no because it's confrontational, although you may disagree. It's not about disagreeing. You never say yes, but, because that's also conflictual, potentially. The secret is always the yes, and. And going back to your example, with the guy with the zoning, he was absolutely key on doing this, that, and the other, and all the rest of it. And it did get confrontational. It was actually quite fun. But I remember going up to him, and I didn't fully kind of explain myself, but trying to keep him cool and that sort of stuff. And my view about that was, yes, zoning is a good idea. But, well, why don't we try and invent a new zone? That was going through my mind. Why can't we call it a social enterprise zone? So I agree that certain things shouldn't happen there. They shouldn't be welding and polluting the air and all that sort of stuff. But you can operate little businesses out of home and all the rest of it. And we didn't get that far, but that could have been a yes and. Yes, great, zoning, good idea. And you know what? We can have a new one. And that yes and has been central, certainly to my kind of ability to kind of get on with people and so on. But also, Hans, you know, seeking questions you can ask together. That's an absolutely vital one. We think that the participatory process usually starts when we've asked the question, we've actually got an agenda, now let's work together on the solution. No, I can give you lots of examples where, you know, we doing surveys, housing survey, I remember in London, talking to families about living rooms and sizes of bedrooms and kitchens and so on and so forth. And we said, thank you very much indeed, we've now finished. And they would say, no, but you haven't asked me about my work. This is a housing survey, it's not about work. But actually their work and their income was critical to their description of housing because it was not affordable. So, you know, we separate these things out as such, but seeking questions we can ask together. And isn't it interesting that we always start with things that we disagree on? Why can't we start with things we agree on? And there's always stuff that actually brings us together. But and in discussions, usually, we start with things that we don't agree about, which of course leads to other things and so on and so forth. So the principle for me has always been, how do we converge interests? Because there are always common interests that we have, whilst at the same time respecting differences. If we just converge interests, it becomes top down, and whose interests are they in the first place? If we just kind of let differences take control, then again, it's chaos, potentially even conflict. So, yeah.
But there are situations where that you cannot go along with. I mean, there's a limit to the sort of.
There is a limit, but I always say, and it's one of my kind of takeaways, never say can't, because there's always a can. Yeah. The can may not be where you want to start, but at least it's a start. And I give you that example in South Africa where we had this workshop going on, and on the third or fourth day, I think it was, just after the removal of apartheid, a bunch of people came in, political very, very political group, as it were, and disrupted the entire session. And everyone said, yeah, told you we can't do this because these guys have not been involved.
Yeah.
And I'm going, no, let's not come to that conclusion yet. Let's start again. And I pulled out of my bag, which was from the some of these games from the Planning for Real exercises. It was the agree-disagree game. Everyone has 3 bits of paper, and they write a priority on each piece. It goes on the floor on a table. You go around looking at them. If it's not your priority, you turn it over. And the one rule is that once it's turned over, you can look at it, but it has to remain turned over. And at the end of the day, there must have been about 150 bits of paper all over the floor. And only 2 remained turned up. And one was about the street lights, which are like prison lights in the townships of South Africa. And the other was about getting the elderly from one end of town to the other, where the clinic was in the white section. That was problematic. And they remained turned up. And I said, look, that's a start. Now, this program that we started was about schools, about housing, about libraries. What the hell has street lights got to do with it? No, it's a start. It's a way of bringing people together. And that's how we did start. And then we brought people together in different ways. They didn't like each other, but it was the beginning of a partnership.
This is something else you brought on in some earlier conversation, that you never deal with big problems by applying big solutions. You have to deal with them incrementally, similar to the couple of issues that turned up. Yeah, it is. I wonder if we could have used that technique in approaching the RIBA on what architecture is about. Because we being relevant is one of these issues that you have been talking and writing much about, and this becoming acknowledging the sort of responsibility we have. We touched upon it a little bit earlier also. Taking responsibility for the impact of what we do as planners, rather than the implementation itself or the intervention itself, but the consequence of that intervention. That to me is a crucial dimension in architecture and planning, for that matter. But in architecture, there's so much not taking responsibility.
Absolutely. No, I think that's the case. For a long while, there was a discussion amongst colleagues, even my students to this day, say, look, I love my architecture, I love my engineering, I love my art, but I also want to be relevant. And I'm going, what do you mean being relevant? Because after all, building a house, that's very relevant. And no, it's wanting to have a bigger impact. And that goes back to the is and the does. What a house is one thing. What it does is something else. So then you have to deal with the primary causes and not just the symptoms of problems. There's garbage on the street. Well, you've got to pick the garbage up. That's the practical issue. But why is it on the street in the first place? Lack of belonging, no sense of ownership, lack of capacity amongst the local authority to pick it up, no money. Those are the primary causes. Now, to be relevant, to be strategic, is to deal with those primary causes. I think it was Martin Luther King who once said that peace is not just the absence of conflict, but also the development of justice. You've got to get rid of the conflict because that's the beginning of peace. But justice is actually an integral part of continuing with it. So again, the question for all of us is, how can we do what we do best, whether we're architects or whatever, but in a way that's relevant to some of the major strategic issues that we face today?
In the same time, I think it's also important to state that this does not demean architecture as an art or as architecture. It's actually highlighting the impact that good architecture has on its community. Absolutely. Rather than this bland, functional blandness. But because this relates very much to what good architecture is. It's the experience of something that changes by means of good architecture. So it's not really a change in appreciation, but it is actually taking responsibility for the impact architecture holds.
Absolutely. Well, in all our work, and particularly in development work, and I don't want to go through the PAS stuff again, because I've been written about it for ages. But, take the housing issue, for example. It's one thing to sort of say, right, problem is housing, right, provide houses. Well, that's not. Houses is only one part of the solution of housing. you've got tenure, you've got finance, all that sort of stuff. So the question then is, for me, what is it you're trying to enable? And that gives you a very different level of provision. If you're trying to enable something affordable, that may be to do with tenure, it may be to do with financing, forms of ownership, incremental housing, for example, starter homes, all of that stuff, which is very, very different. And on that basis, what you need to provide maybe is not just a house, but training, money, changing some of the rules and regulations so that it can be more legitimate to build your own, and so on and so forth. That enablement agenda becomes part of the strategic work.
Yeah, I really appreciate. It's been very helpful to me distinguishing between the strategic and the practical. It actually a lecture on its own, because I now want to have you sum up some of the major issues that your lifetime's work actually has brought about. It's crazy to ask you for a 2-minute presentation of that, but try to put in the most important sort of conclusions to all your thinking and all your
they're tough ones. There is absolutely comes to all that. But certainly, let me share one or two with you that have been integral to my kind of thinking and so on. And the first, it's always challenging professionally, is recognizing your own ignorance. You'll never know it all. What you want to know is enough to get started as such. What I think Eric Dudley once called optimal ignorance. Not knowing can in fact be an advantage. If I knew everything that I needed to know when I was working at the GLC, I wouldn't have started, given that all the impact that it actually had. So I consider the development practitioner to be something like Plato's philosopher, someone who stands somewhere between knowing and not knowing. And that's quite a tough one for professionals, because we're taught that we've got to know everything as such. Yeah. Being reflective. Some people even call it wasting time. But as the saying goes, if you enjoy the time you waste, it's not wasted time. And I can give you wonderful examples of once when we were in Thailand, the students who were in Chiang Mai, the students stopped to talk to a Buddhist priest. And after a little discussion, he said, come up to the temple, you can see it. And the student said, no, we don't have time. And he said, well, if you haven't got time, you should have come yesterday, which in other words, you make time for stuff that you really want to do. My kind of summary of the reflective practice thing is don't think too much before you start doing, and don't do too much before you stop and reflect about it. And that's, I think, a really critical part of the whole action planning and action planning processes. Reflective practice. It means that each step you take tells you something about the next step. It's actually trying to get into something as such. And in that sense, the third or the fourth lesson that I've learned is that if you want to get something going, you have to often work backwards. And you say, what the heck do you mean work backwards? Well, normally speaking, we'll, as planners or architects, we'll do our surveys. We'll analyze the results of that survey in terms of money, in terms of this, that, and the other. We'll make a plan. Once the plan is finished, we'll implement it. Well, by the time you get to implementing the plan, projects that I've been involved with, the data changes, the money's run out, and you don't do anything. So you have to go back and do more surveys and so on. Whereas with the action science stuff that I've realized, it starts the other way. You know enough to get started, so you implement something. From that, a larger plan emerges incrementally. Yes, of course, that has to be analyzed in terms of its economics and all the rest of it, for which you have to do surveys, which then tell you something else about the next step to implement and so on. So it's the same process, but in reverse. It's working backwards. So if you want to move forwards quickly, you have to work backwards as such. So that was another clear lesson I learned. Embracing serendipity, taking up the opportunity of coincidence, absolutely key. When we have too rigorous a plan, we find that coincidence gets in the way of it. Oh, look, that interferes with my plan, but that's exactly what we want. Coincidence, taking chance, giving chance a chance, as it were, to take advantage of that in building your plan. Again, part of the action science approach. I'll end there with just one final point that I'll make. Feeling good, having fun. If you're not having fun, something's not right. But it's an interesting one because it's the world that we operate in, where to measure success is quite difficult. I can't point to anything that goes into my portfolio. I can't really point to a building that's up and so on. So how do you measure success? Do you take pictures of smiling faces? Well, that's not quite good enough as such. So that becomes a real key. And sometimes feeling good is an absolutely important part of you being effective in what you do. And the question that I put to everyone is, how do you do it in a way that contributes both strategically and practically, but in a way that makes you feel good? I can give you examples of how I made feel good. I felt really good because of all the publications and the newspapers and the television programs that I was on. Some people say, well, that's being a little bit indulgent. What the heck? I was having a lot of fun.
This was actually an appropriate closing remark by you, Nabeel, because we have to pass the word on to our guests.
Oh yeah, well, you don't want to listen to them too closely. No,
no, not you. You heard it before. But there are a number of us who has not. So if we now clear the table, as it were, with Nabeel, you can invite Rachel back into the room. We would pass on to people that Nabeel has worked with or has influenced. These are people that actually have done work according to what Nabeel has proposed or written or thought or advised to. Some have been his students, and some have been his associates. But these are real people who've done real things. They are doers.
You mean
unlike, exactly. We sit on our ass. If ass is a word is that possible to use? Anyway, I'll start out by a canned video from David Sanderson, who succeeded eventually Nabeel, and he also succeeded me in Trondheim. He's presently at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And he said that although he loves Nabeel and Hans, doing it at 4:30 in the morning was a little bit hard. So he taped a small video, which he would like to show you. Could somebody put the video from David on?
Well, good evening and greetings from Sydney, Australia. My name is David Sanderson, and it's a real privilege to be here and nice to be in two places at the same time. Right now in Oxford, but also tucked up in bed in Sydney because it's extremely early in the morning, and much as I love everybody at this session, I'm afraid I love my sleep more. But it's very nice to be here and to talk a little bit around Nabeel's impact, which has been profound and considerable. And this won't even begin to scratch the surface. I thought I'd make it slightly personal and point out how Nabeel has totally shaped my career on at least two occasions. The first is 30 years ago, 1991, when I was doing an architecture course at Oxford Brookes, Oxford Poly as it was, and Nabeel was kicking off a new course called Development Practice, and I had no clue what it was, none at all. And in the first class, I asked what NGO stood for, and asked what the World Bank was and everything else. And then, needless to say, that totally changed my world. Nabeel's approach, his openness, his clarity, the need, the issues, the complex things put simply, changed my world. And I was lucky enough to be Nabeel's research assistant for 2 years, sitting in the pub mostly, nibbling nice, what were they, nice kind of nuts, and being completely seduced by working in this area. And at that time we worked in Belarus and in Peru, and other work which Nabeel was championing. The second big moment was jumping about 14 years forwards to that. And in 2006, after working for a number of years myself in NGOs and loving that, being rather tired and taking extended leave, Nabeel said, why don't you come and tutor at Oxford Brookes at CENDEP? And I said, I would love to. And then he said, why didn't you apply for my job? Because I'm shifting. And I fell off my chair and then was lucky enough to get that job, which led to 8 wonderful years, at least for me, maybe not for anybody else, at CENDEP and Oxford Brookes, and having a great time before, strangely enough, moving to Norway to take on a job at NTNU. There was a very famous professor there called Skotte, Hans Skotte, or something like that, who was shifting. And again, I was lucky enough to end up there for a while, which also was magical. There's so much to say about Nabeel's work, as I said, and we're all talking about that at this session. But it's certainly shaped everything I see and understand and seek to do. Nabeel's action planning approach, where you start at the end, where you don't know, but you jump in, where you ask inquiring questions, where you focus on people, are just extraordinary. His passion for urbanization and all issues urban, for me, was a total game changer. And I remember in 1990, I'm not going to say trying to read, but reading Housing Without Houses and thinking, what? And working through that and learning lots of long words and an awful lot of important stuff. But the work we did together, when I was lucky to be Nabeel's RA and then worked for him while working with Care International, we worked in Peru and then we worked in India. And of course in India, we met with Anshu Sharma and Professor Vinod Sharma and also Mihir Bhatt and others. And that's led to lifelong friendships and working closely with those people. And of course, Anshu's on this call as well. What I really learned from NABS, wow. I hope I tried to do this. The capacity to listen, to engage, to mean it. Nabeel's humility, his approach, where actually have a conversation with him. And you kind of know he knows this already, actually, but isn't showing that in any way. And it's just been incredible. And I'm going to have to read this bit out because I'll get it wrong. But without doubt, I've seen and had firsthand experience of no tiny degree of small change. See what I did there? No tiny degree of small change from Nabs and his work. And there's so much there, and there's so much, and now I'm rambling. And before getting emotional, I'd just like to say thank you very, very much for those things. And it's exciting to be part of this. So thank you. I will carry on my snoring, no doubt. Thank you.
Wonderful. When you see this tape or this program is being recorded, so David, when you see it, thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah. We proceed to Nom in Bangkok, who actually has been Nabeel's student. So Nom, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours, or whatever you say.
Good evening, or good very morning in Bangkok. This is 1 a.m. So I will share my screen. Yeah, I need some photo with my share. So I guess you can see it now. So my name is Supicha Toviwit, or you call me Nom. I was his student back in 2003. Because I did my master's degree at Oxford Brookes at development practice. And then I was his teacher assistant. And for me, I was really nervous because I can't really speak English that well, but somehow Nabeel invited me to be his assistant somehow. So I was like, okay, I would take that chance. And then we had a lot of fun. I mean, we asked the British student to role playing as an urban poor in Bangkok. And I mean, they are so young, like teenagers, that they have to role playing. And we did some action planning in the classroom. And one thing that I learned from Nab by teaching with him is that when you're talking about development practitioners as an enabler, but I think also a teacher also act as an enabler as well. And also teaching should be used as an enablement rather than trying to saying what you want to lecture, but it's more like two-way communication. You have to encourage them to want to study, and then they will collaborate with you. And so this design studio that we did with NAB in 2003 is like a platform for collaboration. And for me, that like, is it what they do in UK? Can you really do design studio like this? So for me, it's really, really fun. And then when I did my PhD at the UCL at the Bartlett DPU, I was also his teacher assistant again, but this one is for the postgraduate level. So I thought it would be more serious, but no, actually it's as fun as the one before when we did with the second year student. So we did a lot of role playing, we did some participatory mapping. So it's really changed the way I perceive architectural education, because now I'm back to Bangkok, to Thailand, and I'm teaching full-time at the Faculty of Architecture at Silpakorn University. And I'm lucky enough that my school allowed me to exercise my practice. And luckily, I work with the Association of Siamese Architects, and we organize like a workshop, and I use it as an excuse to invite my beloved supervisor to Bangkok. Basically, I don't need him to do anything. I just want him to be in Bangkok and have some papaya salad with me. But he flew from UK, and so we did it twice. But of course, we're working, we are really serious. And again, we did what we always do, you know, participatory mapping with the local community, like we're working with architectural students. And it's just making me more confident about this way of teaching, that you don't have to. And what I really like about the workshop, this kind of thing, is that workshop also can act as a catalyst. And workshop is a place and a time that you can taste and reflect. And I really like the word optimal ignorance. And I always say this word with my student as well, that you don't need to be like the smartest kid in the room. But if you know, and you optimize your ignorance and maximize the use of it, and you can do something, and you start where you can. Because I always think that I'm not smart enough. So when I think, he said, oh, it's like he allowed me to be stupid, and that's so liberating for me. So for me, the workshop is something that, you know, students are confident to be stupid, to be ignorant, but at the same time, having a strategy direction or something like that. And so when I come back to Thailand and Bangkok, I did some participatory community development with my student. And somehow I think because I was his teacher assistant for many years, I listened to his lecture like 75 times, but every time I still taking notes, and he's always like making fun of me. Even today, I still like making notes. So when he say, I see what I see clearly, but what am I looking at? I didn't realize when I put the slide together, and then we work with the local street food vendors in Bangkok. You may see them as a problem, or, you know, someone who invade the public pedestrian walkway or whatever. But when we see this kind of thing, it's not just some cheap food. If you unpack it, you will see some local wisdom. You will see some cultural heritage that come with this £1 meal, for example. So what hidden inside this doesn't look so expensive thing, but actually it reflect how the community develop and like cultural background, something like that. So this is a work of my student. And again, we did this is the community that NAPS went to help me run the workshop twice. It's a canal-sided community with old city area. We did some community museum, but it's not a museum as the architectural design at all, because it doesn't look fancy in that sense. But it is actually a place that people, the local, come and donate their objects in their home and give it to the museum. So that means a lot. So museum is not about a place where you collect objects. It's like he said, it's collect the narrative, it's collect the network, it represents the collaboration. So for me, the messy it looks, the better I like it. And another thing about seeing and looking, when you see some local kid playing, you know, with some palm leaf, but if you work with the right designer, for this project, I work with an architect, a very good friend of mine. I brought him to this local community, and when you work, you don't have to do everything by yourself. Like, you don't have to be the smartest one. I don't have to be the greatest designer, but I work with him. And when he saw the kid, he got a lot of ideas, and I brought my student to do some workshop by hand. And then he created this design pavilion in a very luxury shopping mall. And we invited the local community to participate in this installation. And they were like, is that what we did? So they were surprised that, is that 5 baht thing? And that get expanded to be something wonderful. And another thing about what he mentioned today about visible structure of the place and the invisible narrative. This is a project that I did with my team. We we did some lighting installation in this abandoned building. For the outsider, this building is like kind of ghost story, something scary, something like crime related. But what we wanted to do is we want to open this building to the neighbors, because this building used to be a very important shopping mall. So we invite them to come to the exhibition to give us the memories of the shopping mall. So by having this whatever installation and exhibition, we use it as a platform again for collecting memories from the local. Because as he said, it's not about the building, it's not about the physical thing that we see, but it's about the narrative or the memories that the people have with the thing. And I think he has a lot of, philosophical and something very deep, but I think the bottom line is that when you work with a lot of people, you need to have fun. And it's something that I always tell my friend, myself and my student, that if you feel like you're working for society and you feel sad or you feel tired and you're depressed, you should stop, because nobody asks you to do it. You do it because it's fun. So if it's not fun, stop, relax, go shopping or whatever, and then come back. Because I think for our work, we have a trap to feel like we are hero. We're gonna save some life, but that's not true. I mean, Naps always tell us having fun. So say something funny, don't take it so seriously. So that's how me and my team work, because for this one, we're trying to reactivate the Khao San Road who got affected by the COVID, something like that. And we work with lighting in designer, we're working with mafia, we're working with many people. And again, this one is from the flower market. I work with the street vendor, I work with fancy designer, photographer, and just having fun. And of course, Naps always say that you cannot just having fun or do a small thing. You have to be strategic. Although I don't like big guy, but because he keep insisting that you need to be, so I have to like force myself to work bottom up, but at the same time collaborate with the top down people, or make them feel like there's an opportunity in this bottom up thing. So this is the photo of our current Prime Minister, who is just so, okay, let's stop there. Anyway, so he came to the community that Naps went to, and he was really happy about all this community work and all the children. And he has so many policies that actually support like the link between the canal and the main road and the sky train. So bottom up and top down is something that needs to be integrated. So I'm a good student, so you should be proud. And this is the last slide. And even more bottom line, or this is the fundamental, enjoy life, go eat good food, don't dramatize. I mean, he didn't say that, he's kind, but yeah, but when I try to dramatize something, he ignored me. So I think, okay, maybe that's not something I should be focusing on. So just enjoy life and having fun. And what I really learned from him is that you always work as a team. And I also treat my student on my team like the way he treat me. And somehow I really like this relationship that every time I did some project, I always email him that, I'm so proud to be your student. And he was like, and I keep sending him photograph, and I feel so lucky to be your student. And it's really impact me a lot in a good way, for the better, not for the worse.
Thank you, Nom. Thank you, Nom.
Both ways.
It's an interesting or serious issue. This thing about laughter and fun. Investigations, or what we call research, has shown that one of the few common features in the creative environment is laughter. Laughter is something that you always find in creative communities. So I agree. So it's really what we have experienced, but it actually people outside have found out that is the best learning and most creative learning environment you can have, is when it's full of laughter, and that is some of the things that sticks to me also. We have to proceed because time is running here. Anshu, I don't know from before, but I've been introduced to him through Nabeel. So if you could, I know seeds, and it's actually impressive that you are on. I'm honored in that sense as well, because I heard so much about the NGO. So if you could take the table or come to the table and run through your presentation.
Thank you so much, Hans. The honor is all mine this evening. I've not been as lucky as David and Nong to have been Nabeel's student, but I've tried to make up and I've tried to extract as much as I could out of the projects that I've been associated with him on. And today, let me share with you the story of how I started out in this sector and how I met Nabeel and ran the first action planning workshop with him. So this was mid-late 90s. My colleague Manu and I were just 3 years out of college. We had started this little nonprofit called Seeds while we were still at college, and we were still struggling to, find some useful work to do. And through one of our teachers, Professor Vinod Sharma, we were lucky enough to land a project, which was the ODA TDR project on urban risk reduction. So ODA, Overseas Development Agency, was the then name of DFID, and TDR stood for Technology Development and Research. It just sounded so good and so right. That's what we were meant to do, train planners to improve technology development. And our project site was a slum, which was in the river Yamuna that flows through Delhi. So it was in the heart of Delhi, about 120,000 people living in the riverbed. So they had their shacks in the floodplains where they would get water every year. So our data and our intel said that flood is a big risk, obviously. And at that time, Landsat 32-meter resolution was state of the art in satellite imagery. So we studied our satellite images, we made maps, and computers were relatively new. We used this software called SPSS, Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, which was a fancier version of Excel for us. So you could do multivariate analysis, and we surveyed a lot of people, we fed data, and you could ask SPSS questions. So we asked SPSS if there is a correlation between the length of a family name and the number of times their house has been flooded in the last 20 years. And SPSS said yes. It said people with longer family names have seen more floods in the past years. So this was great news for somebody called Ajit Roy, and it was bad news for our project manager, Mr. David Sanderson. So that's how we had met David through this project. He was our project manager, but somehow for a number of reasons, the project ran into some sticky issues. It was suspended for some time. It had to change homes. And that's how it moved to CENDEP. And CENDEP became the holder of the project midway. And we had a new project director, Professor Nabeel Hamdi. So the new director was arriving. He was coming to Delhi to see the state of the works and to run some community action workshops. It's a project in a mess. It's been suspended for 3 months. A director coming from Oxford cannot be good news. So we were like bracing ourselves when David and Nabeel arrived in Delhi. And that was the first time I met Nabeel. And so he was so gracious. He was so humble. He was so full of fun and laughter. Is he the new director? Is what we were asking David. And so in that nice, jolly mood, we went to the Yamuna Pushta area in the riverbed to run the first community action planning workshop. And Nabeel had briefed us how it would be run. There were formats, there were charts. We were to have about 20 to 25 odd people to run this workshop well. And we had made announcements, told people to appear, be well dressed, and so on. And we reached there and we find there's 150 people gathered in this spot where we were to run the workshop. It's like a big Indian wedding. And there's kids, 50 children who are just crowding all over us. They want to touch everything. They want the pen and paper and stuff. And we just had a loss, what do we do now? And there's this obvious community leader who's in charge. He has this, attitude, and he's showing off how he's got this big group here. And before we could figure things out, Nabeel has slipped into a conversation with this guy, with one of our interns translating for him, of course. And in a while, the negotiation is very positive and very friendly. It's appearing that Nabeel has convinced this guy that since he's the leader, he should run a workshop, and Nabeel and all of us should run another workshop. So he should get equal space as us, the outsiders. So it was decided to split the group into two. And then he was offered that since he's a local leader and he's more powerful, he can take more people. And for him, it was like victory, as if he'd won more votes in an election. So he carries away about 100 people to this tree, a big tree that was assigned to him where he could run his workshop, and he's given all the charts and the papers and the power to do stuff and an intern to help him facilitate. And we are left with fewer people. And then what do you do with the kids? So we rounded the kids up, and there were a couple of interns. I see Ollie in the group here today in the audience. So yeah. Ollie was one of those people. And these interns then get the children together. We distribute some pieces of paper and some pens and crayons, and the kids are off to their own assignment of coloring and drawing their neighborhoods. And then we run the workshop, the real workshop with these 30-odd people. Most of you know how Nabeel's workshops run, a lot of planning for real stuff, prioritization and things like that. And that's when the revelations started happening. So now these people tell us that floods is not really a big problem for them. It actually ranked at number 3 on their priorities of risk. And the biggest risk was fires, because the fire tenders can't enter the slum on the sandbanks. And that starts flipping things around, what we had already been doing and researching for 2 years. So technology, research and development takes a U-turn. And then I clearly remember there was this woman who stood up and said that when we were talking of solutions, she says that the best solution would be to build a school and start educational programs. And we said that, no, you've actually got it a bit wrong. We are here for urban risk reduction, and you're talking about a developmental agenda. We will come to that, but right now we need to figure out how to solve the flooding and your fire problem. And she says, no, you got it wrong. And this was an absolutely illiterate woman. And she says, no, you've got it wrong, because why would I want to live here and solve my problems? I could be on the other side of the embankment in Lakshmi Nagar, which was the neighborhood that you could see from the slum. And she says, if my kids got educated and got slightly better jobs, I would not be selling vegetables, and we would just move out. So get us the jobs and get us the education to get those jobs, and we will take care of our risk problems. And that was another revelation or a moment of revelation, because we were talking really short-term, short-sighted stuff, and she was talking long-term, strategic stuff. Mm-hmm. And this stuff went on, and right at the end of the workshop, we walked across to where Ollie and his friends were doing this painting competition sort of thing. And we just lay down on the tables, we laid the drawings that the kids had done, and how children do. If one starts drawing something, all the others in that cluster would draw the same thing. So we had a large number of these neighborhoods. So you saw the houses, little houses, big kids and their moms and people, a big road, and huge hand pumps. And so Nabs asked, why are the hand pumps so big? And we said, you stupid kids, they've never been taught this notion of scale. So they don't have a concept of scale. And then he said, no, let's ask them a bit more. And we got into a conversation, and it turns out that the house was a place of refuge. It was where they were at peace. But every morning they came out with their mothers to the hand pumps. They queued up. There were fights around the water, and there was a lot of stress. And in the children's minds, the hand pumps were bigger than anything else. And that took us to the agenda of water and women and children struggling for that water, the number of hand pumps to a few hundred houses in that area. So in a sense, what was happening was this learning for me and colleagues here, that it's there in front of us. The problems are there in front of us. Even the solutions are there in front of us, but we just don't see them because we've been trained not to see them. We've been trained to see stuff that we want to see, and we want to see stuff that we've been trained to see. And that's completely blinding us out. And this is something that I've carried and it just keeps coming back year after year, project after project. A recent project that we did in Bangladesh, walking through the streets of Dhaka, we split ourselves into lookers and listeners, something we had learned from Nabeel. And the listeners are talking to people and listening, but the looker who's been told not to speak a word and he only has to see stuff, suddenly says, hey, this street has all new tin sheets. Why is that? And we start asking, and we find out that there was a fire last year and they rebuilt. And so why are the walls of tin, whereas the other houses have walls of bamboo mats? And they said, oh, we learned that bamboo burns faster. The tin roofs didn't burn. So we started making walls of tin. And then what happened was that the houses started becoming hotter. And so while it's Bangladesh, the problem is not of cyclones and floods, the problem is of indoor heat. Similarly, you walk in and you hear that kids are not studying well, and that's because they're sad. And why are they sad? Because the windowsills are high. The windowsills are but standard height, but the kids are not sitting on furniture, they're sitting on the floor, so they can't see anything. And so on. You know, this approach literally enters life. It has entered my life. It has entered the life of SEEDS, the organization where I come from. Thank you, Nabeel, for that. Over to you.
Thank you, Anshu. It's almost as if you covered as much as Nabeel did in his summing up, because you touched upon so many of the issues that Nabeel has brought about.
Fantastic.
Again, we are the legacy of being a chair. Time runs out. Jaya, it's your turn next, but I have to please advise you to be serious about time. Jaya, you present yourself. We the three of us now know each other from years in Sri Lanka. He even was invited to a workshop at our university once. You introduce yourself, Jaya, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, and good evening and good morning. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and especially to listen to Nabeel. So I think I have a poster. I will use it to make my presentation or to talk about Nabeel. Okay, this looks very kind of theoretical, but I will tell you how this has happened. I met Nabeel actually more than 30 years ago. You have seen the picture of the first photographs. Nabeel looks young, and also behind him, that Professor Reinhard Gattard was there, and also Susil. It was in one of the slums in Sri Lanka. And I was not a academically student of Nabeel, but I'm a student. I always learn from him in communities. So first, Nabeel was I think advisor to the Million Houses program through the DPIT. So that was the time he introduced the community action planning process in Sri Lanka. That was, I think, in 1983 or 84. But after that, we met with Hans and Nabeel in 2005 after Asian tsunami in one of the towns in the southern part of Sri Lanka. So we had a workshop for NGO staff who was actually supported by the Norwegian government, that's called the Poor Route, and to improve their the capacity of their staff. So that is the time I learned from Nabeel about the strategic action planning. So at the end of this workshop, Nabeel gave me, and also Hans, we sit together, and he said that, you know, we should not write the workshop reports like a typical report. But I mean, you put the things into the kind of point form, use the pictures, and also the things that we can use as it's called the code of practice. And that came up from that workshop, and I think Hans appreciated it very much, and he said that it is in his university library. And the second thing, I was asked to, prepare a poster to incorporate, all the 3-day workshops into one page. So that's how this the poster came up, and it was really lucky to get in this assignment from Nabeel, because I also was able to put all my learning from Nabeel into a one page. So that how this came up. And, the one thing I learned from Nabeel after some time, that we always must have a practical agenda, but within a strategic agenda. So that's what I learned from how we can go beyond the community level into a regional or the city level. And that is also true in my case, because we normally used to do the pilot projects and say that it is very excellent and we have done a good job. But there's not much impact to the other communities or the citywide. So even you do a small thing, but we have to think in a strategic way, go beyond the certain limitations. And that is the time I learned that there are certain limitations in the community action planning process. In order to the address the key issues we discussed in the second workshop after tsunami was how to address the issues of governance and the poverty and the vulnerability. So what the important thing is, we can have a kind of practical agenda at micro level, but at the same time, we can have the macro level perspective, but more to work on the principles. So in this poster, you can see that basically the strategic agenda, we have got the principles, and also within that principle, we work at the macro level. And important thing I learned the community action planning process first in Sri Lanka when the Nabeel and Professor Cathrine and was running this workshop. Actually, it was for 3-day workshop. And then in Sri Lanka, we kind of customized into a 2-day workshop. One important thing, how I developed the certain, the skill of a listening skill, and also to organize the community and keep them for 2 days, because it has to be so enthusiastic, and also the people see a step-by-step process that they are getting certain things what they wanted. So that is how I learned that how you divide the communities into the groups, and then you discuss the issues, solutions, strategies, and a plan for implementation and the monitoring. And finally, the people get the plan. And the important thing, I always use this the CAP methodology. Soon after the community workshop, people, the following day, actually people will start to implement it, because we identify, the kind of community resources available and how to mobilize it. And also we develop their kind of negotiation skills. And at the same time, in this workshop, I also learned from Nabeel, when the things coming to us from the community, to never say no, always to look at that we can find the kind of the solution. So, and at the same time, I learned from this exercise that housing is the kind of entry point to address the livelihood issues. All housing is the process to build the livelihood assets. And I have shown in the poster that kind of 5 or 6 livelihood assets, the process. So And at the same time, I was fortunate to get this experience and apply it actually in Cambodia and also in Bangladesh and also in several other countries. And especially, you know, when you have this kind of a step-by-step process to build the community confidence and to start implementing, and it works well. So I will stop at this time and thanking all of you for the invitation to join the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaya. The poster will be here, which actually is a condensed version of many of Nabeel's books. Imagine, you know, 5,000 pages into one poster. We are running late, people. We are really running late, and the people will cut us off shortly. So we will have to run into the Q&A. And there are a number of questions on my screen. Some we can do fast, like from David Smith. I wonder if it's my David Smith. Hope so. Nabeel, you have certainly experienced significant changes in the societies that you have lived in and worked in over the years. How have these changes influenced your approaches to architecture and planning? What future do you see for these approaches? That is to you, Nabeel.
I have no idea at all. Big question, big and wonderful question. Well, I think what's happening is that the boundaries of what it takes to produce good architecture have expanded. There's no doubt about that. Even the institutions, the RIBA, for example, the AIA, they're becoming more concerned about the value of architecture in a social kind of sense, in a social realm. And so I think that has changed. And whereas in the past, I remember the external examiners would come to my students, look at their portfolios, that's from the RIBA, and they say that this looks really great work, but where's the architecture? What do you mean, where's the architecture? And we know what they were looking for. So I think that has changed significantly. Still more changes are required, because still we are taught, our students are taught to aspire to something like 2% of what architects wind up doing, you know, all the famous guys and all the rest of it. And that's still very much the objective in terms of education. And that's too bad, because actually it's the rest that is important in this particular case. So I think things are changing. I sometimes think that in education we breed disappointment. You know, we actually breed the fact that this is, you know, this is what it takes to be great. No, you can be great in all sorts of other ways. We've got to stop kind of normalizing what greatness really means, if indeed that's what we want.
Thank you. We have another one from Sophie Botsford. She asked, I'm very interested to hear about your work at the Greater London Council, and I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the similarities between community participation in the Global North and the Global South, and whether you think there is a need for more participation initiatives in the UK. A brief one, because we are actually running late.
A very brief one. Yes, there certainly are enormous similarities between all worlds. And I've learned that in the sense that a lot of the stuff that we did with Anshu in Sri Lanka, for example, and in Bangkok, those principles I have learned from those applications and brought them back to working with organizations here, arts-based organizations in Birmingham, for example, to try and apply some of those. So yes, there is incredible convergence between those worlds. And of course, it's not just those worlds that we converge, but any community you work in is different, even within the same context. So to assume that, you know, all the communities in India are going to be the same once we've done that. No, not at all. Absolutely, everything is different. So I think, you know, we can easily think in terms of converging worlds around themes and methods that apply across worlds as such.
Thank you. And the crazy thing is that we're running out of time. We're closing up this show.
That's terrible, Hans.
It's terrible. We should have been in here. I just leave. I like to put on my last picture because I have an appeal to you people who listen to this. It is a picture of, or two pictures of Nabeel with his notebook. And I appeal to you, if you want to, if you are planning to do professional progress in any way, you have to make notes. You have to keep these impressions, these sort of sensory impressions or experiences hot by trying to put words onto them. And the reason why Nabeel's books come out the way they do is because they are so full of immediate comments that are made in the heat of it. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of doing what he has been doing all his life. And from that, I invite Cathrine to close this session. It's too bad. We should have been here for an hour and a half more.
Hey, look. I can see Yasmuni. My granddaughter's there. It's all right.
Yeah. Hi, Ollie.
Cathrine, it's yours. But, exactly.
Thank you. I just needed to be unmuted. Thank you so much. There's so much more to say. And I think the small glimpses we've got into Nabeel's history as well has made us even more interested in learning more. I think I would want to close by a few thank yous and just a very little short conclusion. I want to thank Nabeel, first of all, for the inspiration for change that you have given all of us. And I think that's come out very, very clearly through this session. I think the session has taught us more about how do we understand each other? How do we ask the right questions? How do we achieve change together? We listen, we act, reflect. And I think the aspect of having fun is also about caring for each other. And I think you are helping us to give that space. And I'm really appreciative for that and for what CENDEP has been because of that. So that's the biggest thank. The biggest thank goes to you, Nabeel, today. The other very big thank is for all the people who have been with us today and participated and listened and made us all feel part of this community. Also, thank you so much, Hans, for taking on this challenge and for leading us through all this richness today. Thank you so much to Supicha, to Anshu, Jaya, and David for giving your contributions. And I hope maybe we can put this together in some way. We will have the videos. Let's see what next we can do. I would also very much like to thank the Oxford Human Rights Festival team. There are 20 students across the university, Oxford Brookes University, and a couple of volunteers from the community who has been putting together this program. We have particularly today Angus Stanley and Kasia Kucha, who's helped us with the tech, and of course our wonderful coordinator, El Laskar, who's always there and who has the grip on everything. So there's so many to thank you, but again, thank you so much for the inspiration. Thanks for everyone who's been here. And I just want to go away and make small change for all these big questions now.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much. You've not least the amount of that I've learned from you lot, which has been fantastic. Most of my books have been written on the basis of information and work that you've produced. I sometimes give reference, but not always. So thank you so much for all of that. Thanks for coming too. It's really great to see you.